March 13, 1962. A four-star general slides a folder marked Top Secret across a desk inside the Pentagon. The folder's official title, Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. The man who signed it was General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Inside, a menu of proposed terrorist attacks on American soil. Bomb U.S. cities, sink a Navy ship, hijack passenger planes, and blame every last one of them on Fidel Castro. This was not some rogue officer's fever dream. It traveled up the entire chain of U.S. military command, addressed directly to the Secretary of Defense for approval. Operation Northwoods is not a conspiracy theory. It is a declassified U.S. government document, publicly available at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and addressed to the Secretary of Defense.
And to be precise, the document isn't disputed. No historian questions its authenticity. This is not a matter of interpretation. The paper exists, the signature is real, the date is March 13, 1962.
So when people hear about this and say that sounds made up, they can just go read it. It's at the National Archives.
Here is what gets me, though. How did something this explosive stay buried for 35 years? Walk me through how it actually came out.
That's the wild part. It wasn't declassified because anyone went looking for it. The JFK Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992 forced the release of 4 million documents related to Kennedy's death, and Northwoods was just sitting in that pile.
So the document that proves the Pentagon proposed killing Americans only came out because of an investigation into who killed the president. That is a sentence.
And it took another 9 years after that, until James Bamford published his 2001 book, Body of Secrets, before the general public actually heard about it.
To understand why Northwoods existed at all, you need to start 11 months earlier, April 17, 1961. The Bay of Pigs. A CIA-trained force of Cuban exiles landed on the coast trying to overthrow Castro, and it collapsed completely within 3 days.
So the U.S. tried to invade Cuba, failed spectacularly. And then what? Sat around asking, how do we try this again, but make it look like Cuba's fault?
Essentially, yes. Kennedy was humiliated, the military was furious, and the administration was desperate for a legitimate pretext for direct action. So the Joint Chiefs launched a classified program called the Cuban Project, which the CIA's side was codenamed Operation Mongoose. Northwoods came out of that effort.
So Northwoods wasn't spontaneous. It was the product of a formal, ongoing planning process. How many people in the government knew this kind of proposal was on the table?
Enough to sign off on it. The Northwoods memo went through the entire Joint Chiefs before it ever reached McNamara. All 5 service chiefs approved it. Lemnitzer signed the memo on March 13, 1962. His name at the bottom, addressed directly to Robert McNamara. It wasn't a suggestion box entry. It was a formal military proposal from the highest uniformed officer in the country.
Dear Bob, please find attached our plan to blow up some Americans. Regards, the generals.
The framing as a menu is interesting. Was this one unified plan, or genuinely a list of options they could pick from?
Genuinely a list. The document presented multiple independent provocations at different scales. The idea being that McNamara and Kennedy could choose the level of provocation they were comfortable with, which makes it in some ways more chilling than a single scheme.
A terror attack, Semdi la carte. I will take the ship sinking, skip the bombing, and can I get the fake hijacking as a side?
Proposal 1. Blow up a U.S. Navy vessel in Cuban waters and blame Havana. The memo explicitly invoked the USS Maine, the ship that exploded in Havana Harbor in 1898 and gave America its pretext for the Spanish-American War. The Joint Chiefs were not being subtle about the historical template they were working from.
That's a remarkable thing to put in a memo. Let's do what we did in 1898. By 1962, historians already suspected the Maine explosion was accidental. They were proposing to replicate an incident that may never have been Cuba's fault in the first place.
So the template for their big false flag was itself probably a false flag. That's okay. That's a level of irony I was not prepared for.
Proposal 2. Stage fake Cuban MiG fighter attacks on civilian airliners over international waters. And Proposal 3. Coordinate a manufactured communist Cuban terror campaign with bombings in Miami and Washington, D.C., explicitly targeting areas where the political optics would be sharpest.
Walk me through the Miami and D.C. bombing piece, the memo said. Wounding but not killing refugees.
That's how it reads. The document acknowledged a need to manage casualties carefully enough to control the narrative, injure people, generate headlines, but keep the body count low enough that it doesn't spiral beyond what the government could contain. Which is its own kind of horror. The bureaucratic management of how many Americans you're willing to hurt.
There was literally a casualty budget. Someone sat down and did the math on acceptable American injuries for a fake attack. That's not a fever dream, that's a spreadsheet.
And then there is the drone substitution plan. Probably the most technically elaborate proposal in the document. A real commercial flight with real passengers booked under their real names would secretly be replaced on the tarmac by a remotely piloted duplicate. The real passengers would be quietly rerouted. The drone would then be shot down by Cuban MiGs, and the US would release an authentic passenger manifest of people who, from the public's perspective, had just died.
That is genuinely extraordinary. In 1962, remote piloting technology was rudimentary at best. Did they actually think that was executable?
I mean, they thought the Bay of Pigs was executable, so...
The document acknowledges the technical hurdles without resolving them. It reads more like a wish list of capabilities than a vetted operational plan, which is part of why Kennedy's response was so swift.
How swift are we talking?
3 days, Kennedy summoned Lemnitzer to the Oval Office on March 16, 1962. 3 days after the memo was submitted, and rejected it outright. No recorded deliberation, no counter-proposal. And then 3 months later, Kennedy pulled Lemnitzer from his post as chairman of the Joint Chiefs entirely, reassigning him to command U.S. forces in Europe.
That's a very presidential way of saying, you're fired, no tweet, just congratulations. You're in charge of Europe now, goodbye.
Though to be fair, NATO commander is not exactly a demotion on paper. Was the reassignment explicitly connected to Northwoods, or is that historians reading between the lines?
The timing strongly implies it, but the documentary record doesn't state it directly. What we know is, memo submitted March 13th, rejected March 16th, Lemnitzer reassigned by summer. Draw your own line. Here is the Steelman that Northwoods believers rightly hammer on. This was not one rogue general with a bad idea. Before the memo ever reached McNamara, it had been reviewed and approved by all 5 Joint Chiefs of Staff: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Joint Staff institutional consensus.
That's the part that should genuinely unsettle people who want to dismiss this as a fringe proposal. 5 separate service branches looked at "Let's bomb Miami and blame Cuba" and signed their names to it.
5 adults, with 4 stars on their shoulders, looked at that plan and said, yes, this is the document we are sending up.
And that's exactly what makes the institutional argument so durable. You cannot call it an aberration when every person in the room agreed. The question Northwoods forces is not, was one general crazy? It's, what does it mean that the entire top of the military command thought this was a legitimate option to present?
Which is, I would argue, a more important and more uncomfortable question than whether the plan would have worked.
And the document itself knew exactly what historical playbook it was drawing from. The main proposal, sinking a U.S. Navy ship and blaming Cuba, explicitly referenced the 1898 USS Maine explosion in Havana Harbor, the incident that launched the Spanish American War. The Joint Chiefs were not being coy about the template.
Which is remarkable because by 1962, serious historians were already questioning whether the Maine explosion was Spain's fault at all. They were proposing to manufacture a repeat of something that may have been an accident the first time around.
So the template for their big false flag was itself probably a false flag. That's a level of irony I was not prepared for today.
Recursively embarrassing, yes. And the document didn't stop at sea. It moved the violence onto American streets. Bombs in Washington, D.C., and Miami, targeting areas with high Cuban exile populations for maximum political optics. The memo specified wounding Cuban refugees and presenting them as Castro's agents. But it also acknowledged the operation would need to, quote, be prepared to accept casualties.
Be prepared to accept casualties from a plan being pitched to the civilian government as a controlled operation. That phrase is doing a lot of work. They were budgeting for American deaths from attacks. The American military would be running.
There was literally a casualty spreadsheet. Someone ran the numbers on how many Americans it was acceptable to hurt for the fake attack to feel real. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is project management.
Now, here is where Morgan earns their paycheck because the counterargument is genuine. Kennedy rejected this in 3 days. Not 3 months of deliberation, not a quiet shelving. 3 days face-to-face in the Oval Office, and then Lemnitzer was gone from the chairmanship by summer. The civilian oversight system caught this proposal and killed it.
And I want to press on that because it actually matters. The document being in the archive is not evidence of a cover-up. It is evidence of a functioning review process. Dangerous ideas came up through the military. Civilian leadership said no, and the record survived. That is the system working.
Okay, but the system worked means the system got within 3 days of a yes. That's a pretty thin margin for working.
Fair. Though 3 days is also pretty fast for a bureaucracy that takes 6 months to order staplers.
The wrinkle that neither side fully resolves, if Kennedy rejected it and the system worked, why was it classified top secret for 35 years? The government's answer is standard national security classification. You don't publish rejected proposals because adversaries can use them. But that same secrecy meant anyone accurately describing Northwoods between 1962 and 1997 would have sounded like a paranoid conspiracy theorist.
And that gap, 35 years where the truth was classified and sounded like fiction, is genuinely worth sitting with. What else from that same planning era is still sitting in a box somewhere?
Right. Because Northwoods only came out because of a law about a completely different scandal. That's not a system designed to surface uncomfortable truths. That's an accident.
So let's put the stakes on the table. Confirmed. No asterisks, the document exists. It is authentic. Lemnitzer and all 5 Joint Chiefs signed it on March 13, 1962. It was formally addressed to Robert McNamara, and it is sitting right now at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Kennedy rejected it. Not one proposal in that memo was ever executed. No credible historian disputes any of that.
That confirmation matters because Northwoods gets used in arguments where the confirmed facts and the speculated conclusions get blurred together. And those are very different things.
The document is real. What people do with the document is a whole other genre.
Confirmed on the classification timeline, top secret for 35 years, released only because the JFK Records Act swept it up. And the public didn't even know it existed until 2001, when James Bamford published Body of Secrets and put it in front of a general audience.
So the Pentagon's plan to bomb Americans stayed secret longer than most people's marriages. And then a journalist found it in the JFK pile.
And that matters for how we interpret the secrecy. The document didn't surface because anyone in government decided the public deserved to know. It surfaced because a law passed for a completely unrelated reason dragged 4 million documents into the light, and Northwoods happened to be one of them.
Now, the thing I want to nail down, because this is where the discourse goes sideways. The document proves the military proposed a false flag. It does not prove civilian leadership would have approved one or executed one. Those are 3 different claims, and they get collapsed into each other constantly.
Right. The government proposed. It is a confirmed fact. The government would have done. It is speculation. The evidentiary record stops at the proposal stage, and Kennedy's rejection is part of that same record. Treating the memo as proof of intent rather than proof of institutional pathology is a category error.
It's like finding a search history and treating it as a confession. They Googled it is not the same as they did it.
The 9/11's connection is where this gets genuinely contested. The argument from truth movement circles is Northwoods proves institutional capacity, and willingness existed at the top of us military command. Kennedy stopped it in 1962, but who stopped it in 2001?
And historians push back hard on that framing. The Kennedy rejection isn't a footnote. It's the operational conclusion of the story. The argument that they could have is not strengthened by a document that ends with, and then they didn't.
Though I will say, they thought about it, got to the Secretary of Defense's desk, and were stopped by one president, is a closer call than I would like my government to be having about bombing me.
Both of those readings are internally consistent. That's what makes Northwoods so durable as a reference point. It genuinely supports contradictory conclusions depending on which part of the story you weight.
What's strange about Northwoods as a historical object is that it doesn't fit the normal conspiracy theory template at all. Usually the evidence is fragmentary and believers fill the gaps with inference. Here the evidence is complete. The document is unambiguous, the proposals are explicit, and the entire argument is just about what you do with confirmed facts.
It's the inverse of the usual dynamic. Instead of, we don't know what happened, so maybe X, it's we know exactly what happened, and we still can't agree on what it means.
Most conspiracy theories ask you to believe something happened that there is no proof for. This one asks you to believe something that's sitting in the National Archives in a clearly labeled box.
And that brings us to the classification question, which I think is the genuinely unresolved thread. The government's rationale for keeping Northwoods secret for 35 years, standard national security classification of rejected proposals, is plausible, but the practical effect of that secrecy was that anyone accurately describing the document between 1962 and 1997 would have been dismissed as paranoid. The truth was classified, and sounding like a conspiracy theorist was the penalty for telling it.
Which should make us at least curious about what else from that same planning era is still sitting in a box. Northwoods came out by accident. That's not a process designed to surface uncomfortable history.
If you want more of this kind of thing, actual documents, actual dates, actual weirdness that government paperwork left behind, we are here every week. Subscribe and hit the bell because next week is not one to miss.
Northwoods gets cited across the entire political spectrum: anti-war activists, libertarians, 9/11ths, researchers, mainstream historians. And they all use the same document to reach completely opposite conclusions. That is genuinely unusual for a historical record.
The contradictory readings are both internally coherent, which is what makes it so persistent. The document simultaneously proves the system failed, because a proposal to bomb Americans made it to the Secretary of Defense's desk, and the system worked because it was rejected in 3 days and never executed.
It's a political Rorschach test, where the ink blot is a classified Pentagon memo. Everybody sees what they brought into the room.
And that's not a flaw in people's reasoning. It's a genuine ambiguity baked into the historical record itself. Which endpoint you weight determines your entire interpretation.
Which is maybe the most honest thing we can say about Northwoods. It's a document that earns the argument wherever you land on it.
Next week, we are covering Project Stargate. The CIA ran a program for nearly 2 decades, spending millions of dollars, to find out whether human beings could spy on Soviet military installations using nothing but their minds. Remote viewing. The funding was real, the participants were real, and some of the declassified results are difficult to explain away.
Spy with your brain is a sentence I did not expect the CIA's budget to contain. I will absolutely be here for that.
If you want to go further on Northwoods right now, the actual document is publicly available through the National Security Archive at George Washington University. The link is in the description. It is worth reading in the original. Nothing we said today captures how strange it is to hold the thing and know it's real.
Go read it. Then come back next week and tell us whether knowing the CIA tried to fund telepathy makes you feel better, or worse about the generals who wanted to sink a Navy ship. We are in the description. Either way, links down there, bells up there, hit both.